On September 9th, 2013, Theranos and Walgreens publicly announced a long-term partnership with a first wellness center in Palo Alto and plans for Walgreens locations nationwide. The launch materials claimed consumers could access clinician-directed tests from samples as small as a few drops. Years later, a federal jury convicted Elizabeth Holmes on investor wire fraud counts, while acquitting her on patient-related criminal counts. Taken cautiously, the public record suggests the central tension. The promise moved faster than the evidence available to many people asked to believe it. Theranos began in 2003 when Elizabeth Holmes established a diagnostics company focused on small sample blood testing. In 2009, according to the SEC complaint, Balwani joined Theranos and served as president and chief operating officer until 2016. On September 9, 2013, Theranos and Walgreens publicly announced a long-term partnership with a first wellness center in Palo Alto and plans for Walgreens locations nationwide. Reporting described prominent board members and advisors, including former senior U.S. government figures, as helping create an aura of credibility. On the public record, the careful interpretation is that the company's promise outpaced the evidence available to doctors, patients, investors, and even many partners. The Walgreens announcement mattered because it put a small sample blood testing promise into a public retail plan. Theranos and Walgreens publicly described a long-term partnership on September 9, 2013, with a wellness center in Palo Alto, and plans for Walgreens locations nationwide. The launch materials claimed that clinician-directed tests could use samples as small as a few drops, or 1,000 the size of a typical blood draw. That language described a specific public promise. Consumers could be directed to tests using very small samples, inside a partnership meant to extend beyond one location. But the promise also created a burden of evidence. Once the claim entered that public channel, the question was no longer only whether the announcement sounded significant. Taken cautiously, the larger pattern in the record is that Theranos' public promise outpaced the evidence available to doctors, patients, investors, and even many partners. By late 2014, the public record included more than the Walgreens rollout. The New Yorker reported that Holmes said Theranos had developed tests to detect dozens of medical conditions from a drop or two of blood drawn by pinprick. That reported claim centered on a very small sample connected to many possible tests. Reporting also described prominent board members and advisors, including former senior U.S. government figures, as helping create an aura of credibility around the company. Those reports support a careful distinction. Credibility around Theranos was not the same as evidence available to doctors, patients, investors, and even many partners. The broader public record supports that reading. Theranos' promise outpaced the evidence. In 2015, that gap would be examined more directly in the scientific literature. In 2015, scientific commentary focused on whether major Theranos-related claims had enough public support in the literature. Ioannidis' JAMA viewpoint questioned whether major biomedical innovation claims, including Theranos's, were happening outside the peer-reviewed literature. That question narrowed the frame from ambition and visibility to what had been publicly shown. Later that year, Diamandis' article in Clinical Chemistry and Laboratory Medicine concluded that most Theranos claims were exaggerated based on available information. That conclusion was Diamandis' interpretation based on what was available. Together, those critiques fit the central pattern shown by the broader record. Theranos' public promise was moving ahead of the evidence available to doctors, patients, investors, and even many partners. The issue was what had been demonstrated and what remained asserted. Then came a detail that required a narrow reading. In July 2015, the FDA cleared the Theranos HSV1 IgG assay for its specific intended use. But the clearance concerned that assay and that intended use. It was not a blanket clearance of the full Theranos test menu. That distinction mattered because the broader public record did not turn on one clearance alone. The New Yorker had reported Holmes' statement about tests for dozens of conditions from a drop or two of blood. Ioannidis' JAMA viewpoint had questioned whether major biomedical innovation claims, including Theranos's, were happening outside the peer-reviewed literature. And Diamandis' article concluded that most Theranos claims were exaggerated based on available information. In that context, the FDA clearance did not resolve the larger pattern. The public promise outpaced the evidence available to doctors, patients, investors, and even many partners. On October 15, 2015, the Wall Street Journal reported that Theranos' proprietary device handled only a small fraction of consumer tests at the end of 2014, and that the company used traditional machines for the vast majority of tests. Because these claims are serious, the wording matters. It was reported by the Wall Street Journal, and later SEC allegations addressed related issues. The SEC alleged that Theranos' proprietary analyzer could complete only a small number of tests, and that most patient tests were conducted on modified and industry-standard commercial analyzers made by others. The SEC also alleged that Holmes, Balwani, and Theranos raised more than $700 million from late 2013 to 2015, while deceiving investors about a commercially ready, portable blood analyzer. The point here is limited to the attributed report and the SEC's allegations about what technology was doing the testing. In June 2016, Walgreens terminated its relationship with Theranos and said it would close all 40 Theranos wellness centers in Arizona. The Walgreens relationship had been publicly announced in 2013 as a long-term partnership, with a first wellness center in Palo Alto and plans for Walgreens locations nationwide. Now that relationship was ending. 2 years later, on March 14, 2018, the SEC charged Theranos, Holmes, and Balwani with an elaborate, years-long investor fraud involving exaggerated or false statements about technology, business, and financial performance. The DOJ also alleged that Holmes and Balwani engaged in schemes to defraud investors and to defraud doctors and patients, and prosecutors alleged Theranos was not capable of consistently producing accurate and reliable results for certain blood tests. A precise account should distinguish those SEC and DOJ allegations from later outcomes, including the federal jury's acquittal of Holmes on patient-related criminal counts. The legal record on Holmes requires precision. A federal jury convicted her of 1 investor wire fraud conspiracy count and 3 substantive investor wire fraud counts. The same jury acquitted her of the patient-related conspiracy count and 3 patient-related fraud counts. That distinction matters because a precise account cannot turn patient-related allegations into convictions. The verified criminal outcome was the set of investor fraud convictions alongside the patient-related acquittals. The district court later ordered Holmes and Balwani jointly and severally liable for $452,047,268 in restitution. For this account, the boundary is the one reflected in those outcomes: convictions on specified investor fraud counts, acquittals on specified patient-related counts, and a restitution order entered by the district court. The public record also supports the careful larger pattern that the public promise outpaced the evidence available to doctors, patients, investors, and even many partners. The central pattern is not simply that Theranos failed technically. The public record supports a more careful interpretation. The company's public promise outpaced the evidence available to doctors, patients, investors, and even many partners. Reporting described prominent board members and advisors, including former senior U.S. government figures, as helping create an aura of credibility. Ioannidis' 2015 JAMA Viewpoint questioned whether major biomedical innovation claims, including Theranos's, were happening outside the peer-reviewed literature. And Diamandis' 2015 article concluded that most Theranos claims were exaggerated based on available information. In the legal record, a federal jury convicted Holmes of 1 investor wire fraud conspiracy count and 3 substantive investor wire fraud counts, while acquitting her of the patient-related conspiracy count and 3 patient-related fraud counts. That boundary keeps promise, allegation, conviction, and acquittal separate. What do you think made the Theranos promise so persuasive? The technology story? The retail partnership? Or the aura of credibility? Comment below, like the video, and subscribe for more Rise Dossier investigations.